It's getting cold outside, and that only means one thing: it's soup season. And my absolute favorite soup is Zuppa Toscana. It's made with Italian sausage, potatoes and kale, and a rich chicken broth with a little bit of cream. It's super simple to make, and it's the absolute best cold weather soup. Alright, before we start our soup, we're going to make our own chicken stock. And to make chicken stock, you need chicken bones. Some butchers will sell them, but if you can't find any, we can just cut up some whole chickens, which can be found at any grocery store. I'm going to show you two different cuts on the breast, the first being a boneless and the second being an airline, which just means the first joint of the wing is still attached. You can feel where the joint is with your finger, just cut in between the bones to separate and leave the drumstick attached to the breast. Next, we're going to separate the skin from the breast and thigh. Now if you flip the chicken over, you can feel where the hip joint is. We need to pop the hip out of the socket to give us a solid base and make taking the thighs off easier. Just put some pressure on the joint and pull the thighs away from the breast. You'll feel the joint pop out of its socket. Now you can see we have a nice stable base so the chicken doesn't move around while we take the breast off. You can feel the breastbone between the two breasts. Run your knife along one side of it. As you cut down, you'll feel where the wishbone is. If you follow along that angle, you should be able to take all of the meat off cleanly, leaving the tenderloin of the breast attached. But when you get to this point, you can see where the wing bone is attached. Cut inside of the joint to keep the bone attached. This is called an airline breast and is a very nice presentation. The breast is still completely boneless, we just left the drumstick attached. Now turn the chicken around and do the same process on the other side. If you keep along that angle, you can just work down until you're all the way through and you'll have a boneless chicken breast. Now on the other side of the chicken, just above the hip bone we separated earlier, you'll see a bulge of meat on each side. This is called the oyster muscle as it resembles the shape of an oyster. This is the best part of the chicken to a lot of people and is very easy to accidentally leave attached to the carcass when taking the leg quarter off. Work along the carcass and bring your knife downward as you get to the oyster muscle as it sits in a little indention. Because we've already separated the hip bone, you should be able to follow along the carcass with little resistance. Do the same thing on the other side and set the carcass aside. Now to separate the leg and thigh, feel where the two bones meet and we're just going to cut in between them. Again, there should be very little resistance. If it's hard to cut through, feel for the separation again with your finger. And you can always leave the leg quarter in one piece for barbecue or whatever else. I like to cut my own chicken at home. It is much cheaper than buying pre-cut and you get the bones for stock. Throw the meat in the refrigerator for your next meal or vacuum seal and put it in the freezer. We're going to need 3 to 4 chicken carcasses for our stock. Put the chicken bones in a large pot and cover with cold water. It is very important that we start with cold water to achieve a nice clear broth. Turn the flame on high, and as you begin to see some scum rise to the top of the water, we need to skim it off. Do this as soon as possible and be sure to get it all. Once the water begins to boil, reduce to a simmer and add 3 large yellow onions, 4 carrots, and 4 to 5 celery stalks chopped in large pieces. This is our mirepoix, which is the foundation of a lot of soups and stocks. We're also going to add a handful of fresh thyme, 6 to 8 fresh or dried bay leaves, the stems of 1 bunch of Italian parsley, and about a 1/4 cup of whole peppercorns. Keep the stock simmering for 2 to 4 hours depending on how much time you have, but do not let it boil. At this point, we can strain the broth through a fine mesh strainer. If you make too much, it freezes very well or can be refrigerated for up to 5 days. Be sure to taste your stock. It's very good by itself, and it's also good to know what your ingredients taste like. We can begin the soup by cooking 2 pounds of sweet or mild Italian sausage in a pot on a medium heat. The sausage is not actually sweet, that just signifies that it's not spicy. Break the sausage up a little bit and add 2 yellow onions diced up, 2 tablespoons of fennel seed, 2 tablespoons of dried oregano, and 2 tablespoons of paprika. Sauté until the sausage is cooked and the onions are translucent, and add about 10 cloves of fresh chopped garlic. Do not use the pre-chopped stuff, it's not the same, I promise. Cook for about 5 more minutes and we can add our chicken broth. Once the soup begins to simmer, you'll see the fat from the sausage and the chicken broth will have risen to the top. We want to skim this off with a ladle. Just barely breach the surface, and you can skim just the fat off without taking any of the soup out. Let the soup simmer for about an hour, and then we can add about 4 Idaho potatoes, diced up with the skin left on. Then add 1 bunch of chopped kale with the stems removed, and 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream. Let the soup simmer for about 30 minutes and then taste for seasoning. We have not added any salt to this point, as the chicken stock and sausage will likely be almost enough seasoning. Add salt to taste and be sure the potatoes are fully cooked. I like to eat it with my favorite Italian sandwich on a cold, rainy day. And as always, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow.